But as I was studying more and more Ayurveda and the other knowledge systems from India, I discovered this beautiful book, the Bhagavad Gita.
I think bring this awareness that it's not truly a religious script, right?
For sure.
Because the moment you hear, oh, it's coming from a certain religion,
For sure.
I think it's based on, I would say, human religion. And I think Gita Krishna says that I am in each one of you.
Bhagavad Gita is that it talks a lot about yoga. And what's interesting in the Bhagavad Gita is that Krishna is referred to as the Lord of Yoga. Well, first of all, the title of the book is going to be Gita Filipina.
If I achieved that elevation of my consciousness, I would be Krishna and I would have answers to all my problems. Namaskar, Mabuhay. So this is Aparna back again with Soul Yatra Unfolds. As promised, today again unfolding something extremely interesting. So in this series of discoveries, what I discovered was there is a very famous scripture in India, in Hinduism or in Vedic history, which is called the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita is book of a script rather of 18 chapters. This is a script which is a conversation between Lord Krishna and Arjuna, the great warrior. This conversation happens right in the middle of a war zone, on a war field. It is an offshoot of a book called Mahabharata, or one of our most revered, oldest scripture, written by Ved Vyasa. Now, during the context goes like this. Within the family, there were two cousins or set of cousins who ended up, having a fight. One said it was for morality, for dharma, for the right reason. The other one thought that they were the most appropriate people to rule the people at this time and nobody else deserved. So that's where it started. And then the main hero, Arjun, or Arjuna, what you would call, right when the war is about to start, Arjun stands there, Arjuna, and he sees all his loved ones across him, whom he's going to fight against. And he steps down and he says, I can't do this. And that is when Krishna stands with him and has a conversation. And the revelation from that conversation formed the 18 chapters of Gita. I have an expert who's going to talk about it. But what is interesting today, that this Gita, for the first time, this Bhagavad Gita, is being translated in Tagalog in the Philippines. I was shocked, I was amazed, I was intrigued when I heard that. And I had to speak to him and I said, okay, I have to let everyone know about this. So Gita has been a book which has, in India, we swear by it. For us, I think Gita gives a path for everyone. It has everything within that. Every knowledge within it, of every dimension of life. Some of the most famous personalities who have been inspired by Gita, or rather, out of so many, few who I could name them today, is Robert J. Oppenheimer. You all probably know by his movie, which was recently there. We have the famous astronaut Sunita Williams, the Prince of Bel-Air, famous Will Smith. We had Annie Besant, who was a scientist who followed Gita. We had Warren Hastings, who was inspired by Gita. We've got Philip Glass. We've got famous George Harrison from the Beatles group of the famous group of 60s. Ralph Waldo Emerson. These are just few whom I have named, who have been inspired. Many whom we may not know have been inspired. These are the known ones. And many who could not find their answers anywhere ended up reading Gita and getting their direction of life. Now, with such a profound book coming to Philippines, I think everyone should hear about it and certainly make an attempt to read it for the first time, for sure. I'm absolutely delighted to have Dr. Marco Escarial, who's a doctor by profession, and he's the one who's publishing his book with this translation. It's going to be launched soon, very very close to around the Yoga Day International, around that week or the week prior. So we have him here today in our studio, who's going to tell us what inspired him to go there and a glimpse of that book, just an overview. I mean, it's too deep for us to even capture in many episodes, but let's hear from him, his story, his journey towards Gita, and why is he bringing this as a translation. What does he think that this will achieve, or how is it going to help our our country folk from Philippines, our fellow citizens. Is can that bring any value to us? I mean, it's going to be interesting to hear from him. So here, Dr. Marco, the second time we are meeting after our
That's right.
podcast on Ayurveda, and the subjects are getting more and more interesting.
Absolutely. And thank you for having me here again today. You mentioned that I am a doctor by education and profession. This is something that really interested me first in Ayurveda, as we talked about in our last discussion. But as I was studying more and more Ayurveda and the other knowledge systems from India, uh, I discovered this beautiful book, the Bhagavad Gita.
I want to be more specific. How really did you come across?
Oh, absolutely. It was by chance, or maybe better to say, sort of a premonition. It was right before the pandemic, December 2019. I happened to just, look for a book that I wanted to spend my holidays reading in December. And that was December 2019. And I purchased a translation, an English translation of the Bhagavad Gita. And I read it, the first few chapters, learning about the context of what you talked about, the context of the war, and how Krishna teaches some important lessons on life to Arjuna. And as I delved more into the 18 chapters, I just couldn't put it down.
Wow.
And I found myself reading it again and again over a period of 2 weeks. And from then on, I started, let's just say, applying some of the lessons that I learned from the Bhagavad
Before
Gita.
you even apply, I'm still curious to know, how did you find Krishna and Gita? How did you search it?
Yeah, I think what makes it easy for someone like me to get interested in the Gita is that it's very relevant.
Sorry, I'm just stepping in to again ask the question. So I know you said that it was pandemic and there was a premonition, whatever caused you, but is there still a deeper reason? I'm still intrigued or curious. Why Gita or why Krishna?
In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna actually gives 4 reasons why people would come to the Gita or come to him. And it's very interesting because I find that these answers are true in my life. And what are these 4 reasons? The first one he says is crisis, right? People come to the Gita, come to him because of a life crisis. The second reason he mentions that, very interestingly, some people who are looking for wealth, they think they will find the answer in the Bhagavad Gita or in his teachings. The third reason is plain curiosity. You don't know what the book is about, what his teachings are on, and so you come to it and you discover more and more. And finally, the fourth type of person who comes to him is the person who's in search of the highest truth. And so these are really all very interesting reasons. I would say that I have a bit of each of the 4 in terms of why I came to Krishna and to the Gita.
Thank you. That was very interesting because back home, it's always said that Krishna doesn't come to you. We go to him.
That's right.
And we go to Gita. And you just explained beautifully why one would go there.
Yes,
Yeah.
indeed. Yeah.
So now let's hear more about your journey into this. When is it going to be published? And what's your objective? How do you think this is going to help people around? I mean, anything what you can share about it.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, the title of the book is going to be Gita Filipina,
Wow.
right? So obviously, it will be a translation of the beautiful text of Bhagavad Gita into Filipino. You talked about how this is going to be the first ever Filipino translation. There have been many English translations.
Right.
And because I appreciated so much the lessons that one can gain from reading the Gita, I said, it can't be that all these years there's been no translation into Filipino. And so that's my first objective here. It's really to make the lessons of Bhagavad Gita, the teachings, more available to a wider audience in the Philippines.
And can you also, before we move ahead, I think there's a very important perspective I want everyone to know.
Yes.
And I would love to hear from you, or rather, do you agree that Gita, while it says Lord Krishna, who's sharing things about the questions like what he said, answers to those, I don't think anywhere Gita tells you you must follow a certain religion.
Yes.
You must follow a certain ritual. It just tells how you navigate in this material world
Yes.
to make your soul a more peaceful journey than what we do. It could be, you could be from any part of the world, you could be from any religion,
Yes.
caste, creed, whatever. That's what we believe, but I'd like to hear from you.
Yes.
What is your learning from that?
Absolutely. And I would even go as far as saying that, most people think when I speak about teachings or lessons from the Gita, it sounds like the Gita is giving you very specific advice.
Correct.
In fact, it doesn't. What it does really is it shows you the reality of this world, the reality of who you are, right? The reality of the physical world, our mental world, and our spiritual world. So on all those levels, the Gita lays out for you clearly, okay, this is what you are, this is who you are, and this is what reality is all about. And having such clear knowledge, as you said, now enables you to know how to be able to navigate your relationships, your professional life, your personal life. All of these areas can definitely benefit from studying the Gita.
So, on that note, can you share some specific examples? I'm not saying you have to quote a verse or, say from certain chapter,
Yeah.
but in context of a day-to-day life, what lesson did you learn, or what one could learn in the Philippines from that,
Yes.
or globally anywhere, whoever wants to learn?
Yes, absolutely. And we can speak about this from the context of, let's say, mental health, right? We are in the month of May, we are celebrating Mental Health Awareness Month, right? And one of the things that a lot of people talk about nowadays is stress, right? Very commonly, people say that they are stressed out, they don't know how to handle stress, they're overworked, right? And one of the lessons that I personally learned from the Gita is the reason why people are stressed is because they are worried about the outcomes of everything that they do. So we can speak here about a very particular verse that the Gita proposes, and that is, you have the right to work, or you have the right to your actions, but you do not have the right to the fruits or the outcomes of those actions. It's a very simple reality that the Gita lays out. And meditating on this short verse, reflecting on it, it tells you so much. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Because if you are so hungry, desiring the outcome of a particular work that you're doing, and it doesn't happen, that's the time that you do get stressed out. Right?
That's what I wanted to really hear from you, because many people question, how do you say that I have the right to, know how to work, what to work,
Yes.
but I have no right to the outcome because all I'm doing is because for the outcome, right?
Right.
But like you said, it often happens, right? Sometimes I plan for a certain outcome. It might elevate to outcome plus A, more than expected.
Yes, indeed.
But there are times when it can go
Less.
southward, right? It
Yes.
can go far less. And that's what I think, that's where it kills us, right? I mean, stress, anxiety, disappointment, anger,
Right.
whatever. But I think this is where maybe, rather, I would hear from you So how would this line apply there?
Yes, absolutely. And it's really about, embracing whatever life takes out of your work, takes out of your actions, right? It's not about not planning, not doing your best. That is still what you are expected to do, right? To plan for the outcomes, to do your best to reach that outcome. But once you've implemented that action, that type of work that you're doing, then you detach from the outcome, right? In doing so, you are able to maintain what we call balance or equanimity, whether it's success or failure, right? It's not going to impact you, it's not going to make you stressed out, right? And to me, this very simple lesson, right? If people can learn this simple lesson, I think a lot of people who are stressed out, suffering mental health issues, can already start gaining a lot of benefit from this text.
So doesn't it resonate with the famous quote from Thomas Edison, right? He said, "Who said I failed 1,000 times? There were 1,000 steps to making the bulb," right?
That's right. Yeah. So you could imagine if he was extremely attached to becoming successful on his first try or on his 10th try. So he had to go through all those 1,000 steps in order to get the outcome, right? So he was never attached to the outcome. What was important was he kept on trying.
Right. So I'm just thinking this could mean so much to our young generation, where we have, failure is bringing so much of stress or nasty competition, or, a whole bunch of problems, relationship issues. It's, the ripple effect is on many other dimensions of life. Imagine this, just one line can bring so much of a difference to our people, right?
Indeed, indeed. And that's what I love about the Bhagavad Gita is that the lessons are very practical. You can immediately apply to your particular situation.
So some more for our people in the Philippines. That what else could you share which would really attract them to read this?
Yes, absolutely. And I think the other big thing that I discovered in the Bhagavad Gita is that it talks a lot about yoga, right?
Yes,
And
yeah,
I know that for many people, they practice yoga more at the physical level, right? People do not see or appreciate that yoga is such a deep tradition that coming, for example, from the Bhagavad Gita, there's so much more to yoga in terms of what it can do for you mentally as well as spiritually, building on top of the physical dimensions of yoga. And what's interesting in the Bhagavad Gita is that Krishna is referred to as the Lord of Yoga.
that's correct.
So,
Yes.
very interesting. I think that if people can appreciate this, get interested in the text, then they will have more impact in practicing the different dimensions of yoga.
Yeah, I did quote this in my other episode, which I made for yoga, and where, I quoted from Gita, where Krishna says that detachment from both success and failure is what will lead to a steady state of mind, right?
Indeed, indeed,
I
yes.
mean, it might sound very contradicting, but I'm sure when we speak to many people who are far more successful and happier, would relate to what we're hearing out of this, right?
Yes, indeed. If I can add here, the Gita talks about so many aspects, including the physical, right? There is a part in the Gita where he says that somebody who aspires to be a yogi, somebody who practices yoga cannot be somebody who eats too much or eats too little, or who sleeps too much or who sleeps too little. And you look at this advice, it's so logical, it's so practical, that I think that if you follow it, a lot of these problems, again, in physical and mental health, will immediately be addressed. Right? And it's not even a religious approach.
Exactly. So it's not religious, and it is very relevant to our modern society as well, right?
True, true, indeed. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me something. This Bhagavad Gita is in pure Sanskrit.
Yes.
So you read it in English, like you mentioned.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, when you're translating, uh, have you sought any reference guidance? What I'm just trying to understand is,
Yes.
are you independently doing it, or you've got somebody whom you're seeking help as well?
Yes, that's a very good question. And Sanskrit is a very ancient language. I think many people realize that a lot of the Filipino words are actually coming from Sanskrit. Unfortunately, in this modern day and age, that realization of the connection between our local language here and the connection with Sanskrit has been lost.
Babayan
By buy-in, that's correct.
or
A lot of
even
it,
Alibata script
Alibata
is
script,
right.
yes.
Yeah.
Some of those words are, are definitely coming from Sanskrit, and we can cite a few, right? I think you've talked about this in your
Yeah,
previous.
my first episode
That's
was
correct.
on this. Yeah.
Yes. So, in order to be able to translate the Gita, I had to spend 4 years. So, it's been 4 years since I first picked up the first copy that I read. I've had the opportunity to study Ayurveda as well as different philosophies of the Indian knowledge systems. And so, with that background, I got more exposed to Sanskrit, not academically, right? But because I'm also practicing yoga on my own and really immersed in the words, that's helped me a lot to be able to translate the words using both the what I've read in the past to inform the translation. But what's interesting in the book that I did the translation in is that I maintained the poetic style of the
Okay.
original Bhagavad Gita. The reason why I did this is because first I wanted to keep it simple
Right.
and very relatable for the Filipinos. Filipinos love singing, right? And
Okay.
because the Gita is in a poetic style, I said, if you're gonna make this something relatable to, then you need to maintain that song chant like feel of the original Sanskrit. And so that's what I did. I even tried maintaining the same meter from the original. So if it
Got it.
was
Yeah.
8 syllables in Sanskrit, it's going to be 8 syllables in the translation.
Wow.
And
It wasn't easy.
it
I
wasn't
am.
easy. And so the other thing I think I'd like to mention here is don't look for a very deep philosophical word to word translation. I tried to capture the very essence of each of the verses, right? And used typical everyday language as best as I could in poetic style.
That's amazing. I mean, that's all I can say. That you're doing it pure independent by
Yes.
your understanding. You don't even know Sanskrit, but you've made so much effort to try to relate. As you said, may not be word by word, but the essence of it, right?
Absolutely.
I think the key lies to this translation being well accepted here is it's important for us to, I think, bring this awareness that it's not truly a religious script, right?
For sure.
Because the moment you hear, oh, it's coming from a certain religion,
For sure.
I think it's based on, I would say, human religion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just based as a normal human, what are some of the disciplines I need to follow, day to day life, how do I live, as well as at times of crisis, how do
Yes.
I manage my mind, mindfulness, what we call nowadays, or my
Yes.
mind, right?
Yes.
So how are you going to take this forward so that it picks up attention and it is seen as a more holistic source of true knowledge
Yes.
without any bias towards any religion?
Yes. And I think this goes back to the whole context of the Bhagavad Gita. In the introduction, you talked about how this is a conversation between Arjuna, the warrior, and Krishna, who was acting as both as the driver of the chariot that they're on, as well as the guide of Arjuna. And just by looking at that context, that it's a war, this is a symbolism for the war that's going within each and every one of us, right? And that makes it very relatable too, right? We all have our battles between what's right and what's wrong, what's ethical, what's not ethical. Right? This goes on every minute, every second of an individual. And so the way I would approach the Bhagavad Gita in sharing why this would be helpful for people is to take a look at this as precisely that. It's a symbolism of what goes on in each and every person's life. Arjuna representing the part of each person seeking help, looking for answers, asking those questions to the higher self, right? And which that's what Krishna actually represents. Krishna is not somebody who's outside of me or separate from me, right? He is the highest level, representing the highest intelligence of each and every person. And the person who's confused is seeking answers from that higher level of intelligence. And once you're able to connect to that higher awareness, that intelligence, which is really what yoga is, right? I think a lot of people aren't aware. Yoga means union, right? And so uniting your self to that higher intelligence is precisely what's going to make it easier for you navigating this world through the lessons that you can gain from the Bhagavad Gita.
Thank you. So beautifully explained. I'll just summarize that it is the union of your consciousness with the universal consciousness.
Absolutely,
right?
yes.
And and that's a barrier, right? And that is why we don't have the answers. And I think Gita Krishna says that I am in each one of you. So if I achieve that elevation of my consciousness, I would be Krishna, right?
Yes.
I would have that Krishna in me, or we unite and we become
Yes.
one, and I would have answers to all my problems.
Absolutely.
Or rather, I would eliminate the problems,
Yes.
right?
I love how you put it, because most people, when they first pick up the Gita, they tend to identify with Arjuna, which, right? The tendency to be asking questions and feeling confused. For some people who I've managed to convince to read the Gita, I tell them that eventually take the perspective of Krishna, right? Then take the higher level, and that's where you identify yourself now and see the difference between taking the perspective of the one that's confused versus the one who's now able to see clearly what needs to be done.
So, like, I mean, I don't think I have mastered Gita. It's too profound to me to be able to do that until now. I'm attempting to, but I did start using some of these small lessons from that in my day-to-day life, and I found them very helpful. One of my favorite one from that is, I'll probably you will have more details. It comes from chapter two, which is the longest. So I think there's verse number 62 or 63.
Yes.
Where one of the portion I remember says that anger. It is more on anger management, where anger leads to delusion,
Yes.
which leads to bewilderment of mind, which ultimately bewilderment of memory, which ultimately kills your intellect and leads to your destruction. Your
Yes.
this thing. And I applied in small little things. For example, in office, what happens? You get a mail and you think it's absolutely unfair to you, it's wrong, and so you want to retort back right there and then. But after reading this or understanding it a little bit, I would anger. So I said, okay, when I'm angry, I'm not going to respond, but I would write, leave it. And trust me, even after a few hours, when my anger kind of reduced, or next day when I would read, and I would be like, thank God I didn't send this, because it sounded petty. It was like, why do I even need to write this? And it helped me so much to evolve. And gradually, I have tied the knot with this commitment. Whenever I'm angry, I'm not going to talk to someone. And you're prompted to retort. You want
Yes.
to, but I said, no responding, no talking, give it a break.
Yes.
And your perspective changes after a few hours and you feel, thank God, otherwise you could have made bigger mess. This is my learning, but I want to hear from you.
Yes.
Do you resonate to that? Anything more you can expand? And how can this be helpful to our younger generation today?
Yes, absolutely. I think this is a very important set of verses that you have quoted from. So this is about, your mind really focusing on certain objects. It could be an email. It could be something that you want to buy from a store. Anything that your mind spends a lot of time on builds up this desire, right? You want to either do this or reject something that you don't like. And the more you spend time on it, the more you want it, right? And if you don't have it, or you keep on getting the negative thing, like the example that you gave just now, that's when you feel that anger starts to build up, right? And that anger drives you to either forcefully want something or reject something, right? And so the Gita talks about this beautifully. Again, the Gita is not giving you advice, do this or do that. He's just showing you, if you let this desiring, this anger building up inside you, then your judgment becomes clouded, and you therefore now No, even though you know what's right or ethical versus what's wrong or unethical, you still choose what you really didn't want to do. And so that's what you were describing precisely. If I sent that email, you know it wouldn't have done any good, and yet you still did it because of that anger, right? And therefore, this lesson that you're sharing here in your personal life is that you detach from it, right? You let the mind rest. You don't let the mind, simmer in that email or that negative thing that happened to you. And when you come back to it the next day, then your mind is freer to think more clearly, and therefore doing the right thing becomes easier. So again, very practical, and it can be applied in any
Yeah.
situation.
You know what I picked up from this? Look how beautifully we get different dimensions, or I would say synonyms of words. For example, normally a detachment would be overly detachment.
Yes.
But look here, you're talking about just detachment from that situation,
Yes.
from that object,
Yes.
from an act,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And it is so applicable to so many ways. For example, I applied in a situation where I'm talking about responsiveness to someone whom you think is not fair. Now you're describing the same rule applies to somebody who goes who goes into that level of desire, which can cause either addiction,
Mm.
or absolute rage. I want it,
Yes.
and it can apply to any field of your life. It can be relationships.
Absolutely.
Probably you have a family life, but you suddenly desire something which is not appropriate,
Yeah.
and that's where the detachment is required, right?
Yes. Yes.
And our mind body knows that what I'm doing is probably not the best, but we do. And that's where I think, especially for the youth, this could be of so much of value, right? In their
Indeed.
different spheres of life. It could be
Yeah.
corporate, it could be school, college, profession,
Yes.
personal life, right?
Yes, indeed. And again, this in this world that we live in, that we want so many things for ourselves, and we think about it all the time. And again, if you don't get it, you start spending more. You start, having relationship problems. That's the kind of environment that precisely the Gita can really have a lot of good impact.
Great. So before we end, I want to know from you, uh, tell our audience, five top reasons or messages or quotes, or summarize it in 5 points, why they should read what you're writing, and what will they get out. Five, I mean, imagine to get even 5 principles of life to begin with would be awesome.
Well, the first lesson that I think that I'd like to highlight is, to acknowledge this feeling of dissatisfaction. Arjuna says very early in the Gita that he tells Krishna, I do not desire victory or kingship or wealth. In fact, what are these? These are not important. Kingship, wealth, victory, even life itself. And this reflects a lot of the dissatisfaction that people feel in modern life. And to acknowledge that, I think that is a doorway into why people can learn a lot from the Bhagavad Gita. The second one is something that we've talked about earlier, in terms of the importance of being detached from the outcomes or the fruits of our actions, right? We have the right to our actions. We should do our work to the best of our ability, but whatever the outcome would be, it's not something that we should desire, right? We do our best without being attached to the outcome. The third thing is very much related to that, right? So we do our best doing our work, our daily actions in all fields of our life, right? Success or failure may come, right? You can do it in the best way possible, but you really don't know what's going to be the outcome. And so the Bhagavad Gita teaches that whether it's success or failure, right, your mind should not get disturbed. You should have equanimity to either of these outcomes, right? And that's going to help a lot of people really address their mental health challenges, right? Because for many people, getting attached to a successful outcome and getting disappointed with that is really what causes a lot of this anxiety that people experience nowadays. And so, in relation to this, the fourth thing that I want to say is, when you talk about equanimity, that's really about having a stable mind, stability of the mind, not getting disturbed. The Gita talks about the practice of meditation in order to support you in doing this. Right? In the sixth chapter of the Gita, Krishna says that, initially it's not easy to practice meditation, but he says through constant practice, eventually you will still the mind. And this is a very hopeful message for people who have not started integrating meditation into their daily life. They will eventually get to a point that the mind is stable and they will experience this equanimity no matter what they're going through. And I think the final thing that I think is really the centerpiece to the Gita, which I will recommend to your viewers, Aparnaji, is really search for the real self. Right? In the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna tells Arjuna, "You are never born and that you cannot die." And so people know that they have a soul, and yet they act as if that the only thing that matters in life is their body or their mind. But if people realize that they have a soul that is not born and does not die, and you identify with that as the real self, right, that's going to solve a lot of problems in the modern life that we're experiencing right now. So I encourage people to get interested, get curious about the Bhagavad Gita, and really search for the real self.
Wow, this was so beautiful. I mean, very, very well summarized. Five messages, and I would say it's just five, but we have so many out of that.
Oh, definitely.
But yeah, I would urge our dear viewers that you must make an attempt to know this Gita, which is being translated in Filipino language, will be published. We'll keep you posted, and I'm sure whatever you heard from Dr. Marco, it sounds a little more than interesting, and you are going to get a lot of value out of this. So in our strive to bring equanimity between India, Philippines, or I would say global at global level of mass consciousness, our attempts, our endeavors will continue to bring in more interesting topics for you. Thank you once again for watching us. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and ring the notification bell. Thank you.